A black boy helped a white girl who was crying in the park who fell from a bicycle. When her father in the expensive suit started walking towards them, no one expected what happened next. Marcus wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve as he pulled another weed from the community garden. The morning sun beat down on his back, and his t-shirt already stuck to his skin. He checked his watch, 7:15 a.m. He had 4 to 5 minutes before he needed to head home and get ready for the day. "Looking good there, young man," Mrs. Johnson called from her porch across the street. She sat in her rocking chair, coffee mug in hand, watching him as she did every morning. Marcus waved back. "Thank you. The tomatoes should be ready next week." His hands moved automatically through the soil, finding the unwanted plants and removing them with practiced efficiency. The community garden wasn't much, just 4 raised beds and some scattered pots, but it was his. Well, technically it belonged to the neighborhood association, but Marcus was the only one who showed up regularly to tend it. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his mom. "Don't forget to pick up bread on your way home." Marcus typed back a quick "okay" and returned to his work. His mind drifted to yesterday's lunch period at school. He'd sat alone again, like most days. When he'd tried joining a table of kids from his math class, they'd suddenly remembered they were saving the seats for someone else. He'd watched as those seats remained empty for the rest of lunch. The memory made his stomach tighten. He pulled another weed with more force than necessary, spraying dirt onto his shorts. "You okay there?" Mrs. Johnson called out again. "Yes. Just a stubborn one." His phone buzzed again. This time it was his mom sending him his chore list for after school. Clean bathroom, vacuum, living room, takeout, trash, check mail for bills. He knew what that last one meant. They were behind on the electric bill again. His mom wouldn't say it directly, but that's why she'd been picking up extra shifts at the hospital cafeteria. Marcus stood up, stretching his back. He gathered the weeds into a pile and moved them to the compost bin. The garden looked better now, neat rows of vegetables and herbs, all labeled with popsicle sticks in his careful handwriting. He grabbed his backpack from beside the garden bed and pulled out his water bottle. As he drank, a sleek black car drove past slowly. The driver, a white woman in a business suit, stared at him through the window. Marcus kept his eyes down until the car passed. Back home, he found the photo again while looking for clean socks. It had fallen behind his dresser, his father holding him as a baby, both of them smiling at the camera. Marcus didn't remember when it was taken. He didn't remember his father at all, really. Just the empty space he'd left behind 8 years ago. His phone rang. It was Mr. Peterson from the wealthy neighborhood across the park. "Hi, Mr. Peterson." "Yes, sir. I can come by today after school to trim your hedges." A pause. "Oh, you found someone else. I understand, sir. Thank you for letting me know." Marcus ended the call and sat on his bed. That was the 3rd cancellation this month. He'd been counting on that money for the electric bill. Later that afternoon, he walked through Harrison Park, taking the long way home. Families dotted the green space, parents pushing strollers, kids playing frisbee, dogs chasing balls. A group of mothers sat on a blanket, sharing wine and cheese while their children played nearby. Marcus sat on an empty bench, watching. A little boy ran past, then stopped and stared at him. The boy's mother quickly called him back to their blanket, shooting nervous glances in Marcus's direction. He opened his backpack and pulled out his notebook, pretending to do homework. Really, he was making calculations. If he could get 2 more regular yard work clients, maybe they could catch up on the bills. But first, he had to figure out how to get people to trust him enough to hire him. A couple walking their dog crossed to the other side of the path when they saw him. Marcus kept his eyes on his notebook, his pencil moving across the page without writing anything. The sun was getting lower, casting long shadows across the grass. Marcus packed up his things. He had a math test tomorrow, and his mom would be home soon. As he stood, he heard a little girl laugh somewhere behind him. He didn't turn to look. He already knew what would happen if he did. Walking home, Marcus rehearsed in his head. "Hi, I'm Marcus. I do yard work, mowing, weeding, trimming. I have references from Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Garcia." He'd learned to keep it simple, professional. No jokes, no small talk. Just the facts. His mom's words from that morning echoed in his head. "Keep your head high, baby. Your worth isn't determined by their fear." But as Marcus walked past another woman clutching her purse tighter, past another man crossing the street, past another security guard following him through a store. He wondered if his mom was right. He wondered if there would ever be a day when people would see him first and their assumptions second. He stopped at the corner store for the bread. The cashier watched him through the security mirror the whole time. Marcus kept his hands visible, paid exact change, and made sure to get a receipt. Just like his mom had taught him. Outside, the sky had turned orange and purple. Marcus could see his apartment building a few blocks away. In the distance, car horns honked and sirens wailed, the usual symphony of their neighborhood. He walked faster, keeping to well-lit streets. His phone buzzed one more time. His mom, proud of you, baby. Always. Marcus smiled slightly, tucking the phone back in his pocket. Tomorrow would be another day of navigating the invisible lines that divided his world from theirs. Another day of proving himself worthy of basic trust. Another day of carrying the weight of expectations he never asked for. But for now, he just needed to get home, do his homework, and help his mom with dinner. The rest would have to wait until morning, when he'd return to his garden, pull more weeds, and try again. Marcus sat at his small desk Tuesday morning, counting the wrinkled bills from his garden work. $20, $40, $63, $64, $65, he muttered, smoothing each bill carefully before stacking them. His mom appeared in the doorway, already in her cafeteria uniform. Baby, what are you doing up so early? Just counting, Mom. He held up the stack. From Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Garcia last week. She walked over and kissed the top of his head. You saving up for something special? Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to tell her it was for the electric bill. Just saving, he said instead. She sat on his bed, the springs creaking under her weight. Listen to me for a minute. Marcus turned in his chair to face her. I know things are tight right now, she said, smoothing her uniform. But I don't want you worrying about adult problems. Your job is to be 13. Do well in school, and hold your head high. You understand? Yes. And Marcus. She caught his eye. Remember what I always say about dignity. It's not what they give you, he recited. It's what they can't take away. That's right. She stood up, checking her watch. I got to go. There's eggs and bread for breakfast. Don't be late for school. After she left, Marcus practiced his gardening pitch in the bathroom mirror while brushing his teeth. Hi, I'm Marcus. I do yard work. Mowing, weeding, trimming. I have references. He spat into the sink. I charge fair prices and... He stopped, wiping his mouth. Something still didn't sound right. The walk to school took him through the affluent Oakwood neighborhood. Marcus kept to his usual routine. Hands visible, eyes forward, steady pace. A woman grabbed her child's hand as they passed. A man stopped washing his car to watch him walk by. Halfway through Oakwood, he saw another black kid, maybe 16, being questioned by a police officer in front of a convenience store. The kid had his hands on the cruiser's hood while the officer went through his backpack. Marcus crossed the street, his heart pounding. He walked faster, focusing on his breathing like his mom had taught him. In, out, in, out. At the shopping plaza near school, a security guard began following him the moment he walked in to buy a notebook. Marcus felt the guard's eyes on his back as he browsed the school supplies aisle. He grabbed the cheapest notebook and went straight to the register, receipt clenched in his fist as he left. After school, Marcus headed to Harrison Park. He had no yard work scheduled, not since Mr. Peterson's cancellation, but he liked to sit there sometimes, watching families enjoy the late afternoon sun. He found an empty bench near the playground. A group of kids played on the swings while their parents chatted nearby. Dogs chased frisbees across the grass. The scene felt peaceful, normal. Marcus pulled out his math homework, using his backpack as a makeshift desk. The problems weren't too hard, but his mind kept wandering to the stack of bills he'd seen on the kitchen counter that morning. A sharp laugh caught his attention. A little white girl with blonde hair in a ponytail was riding a bright pink bicycle near his bench. She wobbled slightly as she pedaled, clearly still learning. Her father, wearing an expensive-looking suit, watched from about 30 feet away while talking on his phone. Marcus tried to focus on his homework, but he kept glancing at the girl. She reminded him of his cousin Sarah, who lived in Atlanta now. Same determined expression as she concentrated on staying upright. The girl made another pass by his bench, a little faster this time. Marcus noticed her shoelace was untied. He thought about saying something but remembered his mom's warnings about talking to strange kids. Better to mind his own business. He returned to his math problems, pencil moving across the page. The formulas made sense to him. They were logical, predictable. Unlike people, more families had arrived at the park now. Marcus felt the familiar weight of suspicious glances. He hunched his shoulders, trying to make himself smaller, less noticeable. A woman walking past pulled her dog closer to her side. A father herded his children to a different playground area. Marcus had seen it all before, but it still stung every time. He checked his phone. 4:45 p.m. His mom would be home in a couple of hours. He should head to the store soon to get dinner started. The girl on the pink bicycle made another loop, gaining confidence. She stood up on the pedals now, hair flying behind her. Her father was still on his phone, pacing back and forth in his polished dress shoes. Marcus packed up his math homework. As he zipped his backpack, he heard the sound of squealing brakes followed by a sharp cry. The next few seconds seemed to move in slow motion. The girl had fallen. Her bike lay on its side, one wheel still spinning. She wasn't getting up. Marcus froze, his backpack halfway to his shoulder. The girl's cry turned into sobs. Her father was still on his phone, his back turned, too far away to have heard. Other adults in the park looked around at the sound but didn't move to help. They seemed to be waiting for someone else to take action. Marcus thought of his mom's warnings. Don't get involved with strangers. People will assume the worst. The girl tried to stand but fell back down, clutching her knee. Marcus looked at her father, still oblivious on his phone. He looked at the other adults, still watching but not moving. He thought of his cousin Sarah. He thought of his mom's words about dignity. The girl's sobs grew louder. Marcus set his backpack down and took a step forward. Then another, and another. Behind him, he heard whispers start. Ahead of him, the girl looked up, tears streaming down her face. This was the moment where everything could go wrong. This was the moment his mom had warned him about. But Marcus kept walking, because some things were more important than fear. The girl's sobs pierced the afternoon air as Marcus approached. Blood trickled down her knee, staining her white socks. Her pink bicycle lay on its side, the front wheel still spinning slowly. "Hey," Marcus said softly, stopping a few feet away. "Are you okay?" The girl looked up, her face tear-streaked. When she saw him, her eyes widened and she tried to scoot backward. Marcus felt his stomach clench. He'd seen that look before. He stayed where he was, hands visible at his sides. "I just want to help. Your knee's bleeding." Somewhere behind him, a woman said loudly, "Someone should call security." Marcus glanced over his shoulder. A small crowd had gathered. Some had phones out. In the distance, he spotted the girl's father, still on his business call, facing away from the scene. The girl sniffled, looking at her knee. Fresh blood dripped onto the grass. "I'm Marcus," he said, keeping his voice steady. "What's your name?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Emma," she whispered. "Hi, Emma. Can I look at your knee? I promise I won't hurt you." She hesitated, then gave a tiny nod. Marcus knelt down slowly, maintaining some distance. "That looks like it hurts. I fell off my bike once too. Right into a bush full of thorns." Emma's lip quivered, but she stopped crying. "Really?" "Yeah. Had scratches all over." He pointed to her knee. "May I?" Another small nod. Marcus reached into his back pocket and pulled out the handkerchief his mom always made him carry. It was clean. He'd never actually used it before. "We need to clean it up a bit," he explained, his voice calm despite the growing murmurs behind him. "It might sting a little." More people had stopped to watch. Marcus heard snippets of their conversations. "Who is that boy? Where are her parents? Should we do something?" He focused on Emma's knee, gently dabbing away the blood with a clean corner of the handkerchief. She winced but didn't pull away. "You're pretty brave," Marcus said. "Most kids would be screaming." "I'm 7, Emma stated, as if that explained everything. Practically grown up then." That got a small smile. The crowd had grown larger. Marcus felt their eyes on his back, heard more phones being pulled out. His palms were sweating, but he kept his movements slow and deliberate. "Almost done," he told Emma. "Just need to wrap it up." He began folding the handkerchief into a makeshift bandage. His hands shook slightly, but he managed to tie it carefully around her knee. "There. That should." "What's going on here?" Marcus's heart stopped. The voice came from behind him, deep, authoritative, angry. Emma looked past Marcus and her face lit up. "Daddy!" Marcus stayed perfectly still, his hands frozen in place. He could feel the man's presence behind him, could practically taste the tension in the air. "Emma, are you all right?" The father's expensive shoes appeared at the edge of Marcus's vision. "What happened?" "I fell off my bike," Emma said. "Marcus helped me. Look, he made a bandage." Marcus slowly stood up, keeping his movements careful. He turned to face Emma's father, heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The man towered over him in his tailored suit. His phone was finally away, but his expression was unreadable. The crowd had gone quiet, phone still recording. Marcus heard someone whisper, "This isn't going to end well." He thought about running. He could grab his backpack and be gone before anyone could stop him. But his mom's voice echoed in his head. Your worth isn't determined by their fear. So Marcus stood his ground. He met the father's gaze and spoke clearly, just like he'd practiced. "Sir, I saw her fall. She was bleeding, and nobody was helping. I had a clean handkerchief, so I cleaned the scrape and wrapped it. That's all." The father's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Marcus Thompson, sir. I live over on Cedar Street." He gestured to his handkerchief around Emma's knee. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. I couldn't leave her crying." Emma tugged at her father's pant leg. "Daddy, my bike fell too. Can Marcus help me fix it?" The tension stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Marcus could feel sweat running down his back. He'd seen that look in adults' eyes before, the suspicion, the automatic assumption of guilt. But he thought of Emma's tears, of her brave little smile when he'd helped her. He thought of his mother's words about dignity. So he waited, standing straight, hands visible, face calm despite his racing heart. The father looked from Marcus to Emma, then to the crowd still watching with phones raised. His expression shifted, just slightly. And in that moment, as the sun cast long shadows across Harrison Park, Marcus realized he was watching something change. He didn't know what exactly, or how much, but he felt it in the air between them. He just hoped it would change in the right direction. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs as he knelt beside Emma again, the weight of her father's gaze heavy on his back. The crowd around them had grown, their whispers a constant buzz in his ears. "Does it still hurt?" he asked Emma, focusing on her knee. She shook her head. "Not as much. Can you fix my bike too?" The pink bicycle lay on its side, handlebars slightly twisted. Marcus glanced at her father, seeking permission. The man gave a short nod, his face still unreadable. "Let's take a look," Marcus said, moving to the bike. He kept his movements slow and deliberate, aware of every phone camera trained on him. The handlebars just needed straightening. He'd fixed his cousin's bike enough times to know the basics. "You know about bikes?" Emma asked, watching him work. "A little. My cousin Sarah taught me." Marcus adjusted the handlebars carefully. "She used to fix bikes in our neighborhood." A woman in the crowd spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm calling the police." Just to be safe, Marcus's hands froze on the handlebars. His throat went dry. "That won't be necessary," Emma's father said suddenly, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "The situation is under control." Marcus released a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He finished straightening the handlebars, then checked the chain and brakes. "There," he said, stepping back. "Should be okay now." Emma hobbled over to inspect her bike. Her father moved closer, one hand on her shoulder. "I had a bad fall once," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the crowd's scrutiny. "Right over there, actually." He pointed to a spot near the playground. "Tried to jump a curb and went flying instead." Emma giggled. "Did it hurt?" "Like crazy. Had a scrape bigger than yours." He smiled at the memory. "My mom cleaned it up, just like I did for you. Said I was brave for not crying too much." "I cried a lot," Emma admitted. "That's okay. Crying just means you're honest about how you feel." Someone in the crowd scoffed. Marcus ignored it. "Want to try sitting on it?" he asked Emma, holding the bike steady. "Make sure everything feels right." Emma looked up at her father. He nodded again, but his hand stayed on her shoulder. Marcus helped her onto the seat, keeping the bike upright as she tested the pedals. Her bandaged knee bent carefully. "The handlebars feel better," she declared. "Good, but maybe no more stunts today," Marcus suggested gently. Emma shook her head, ponytail swinging. "No more stunts." The crowd had started to thin, though several people still watched from a distance. Marcus heard snippets of their conversations. "Did you see how he just walked up to her? At least her father's here now. Should we stay and watch?" The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the grass. Marcus knew he should get home. His mom would be wondering where he was. But he couldn't just walk away, not with Emma's father still watching him so intently. "Thank you," Emma said suddenly, "for helping me when I was scared." Marcus felt something tight in his chest loosen slightly. "You're welcome, Emma." He stepped back, finally looking directly at her father. The man's expression had changed, not exactly softened, but something had shifted in his eyes. "The bandage should hold until you get home," Marcus said. "But you might want to clean it properly and put on a real one." The father cleared his throat. "You seem to know what you're doing. My mom's a cafeteria worker at Memorial Hospital. She taught me basic first aid." Marcus pointed to his handkerchief around Emma's knee. "Always carry a clean one, just in case." A police cruiser rolled slowly past the park. Marcus felt his shoulders tense, but the car continued on without stopping. "Daddy, can we go home now?" Emma asked. "My knee's starting to hurt again." Her father checked his watch, a gleaming silver thing that probably cost more than Marcus's mom made in a month. "Yes, we should go." He turned to Marcus. "Thank you for helping my daughter." The words were formal, stilted, but they were real. Marcus nodded, trying to hide his relief. "You're welcome, sir. Just glad I could help." He watched as the father helped Emma walk her bike toward the parking lot, her steps small and careful. The remaining onlookers dispersed, though a few still cast suspicious glances in Marcus's direction. Marcus walked back to his bench and picked up his backpack. His hands were shaking slightly as he zipped it closed. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him feeling drained. His phone showed 3 missed calls from his mom. He'd have to explain why he was late, why he'd given away his handkerchief, why he'd gotten involved when she'd always warned him not to. But as he watched Emma and her father reach their car, a black SUV that gleamed in the evening light, he knew he'd made the right choice. Sometimes, doing the right thing meant ignoring the voices that told you to walk away. Sometimes, it meant standing your ground while the world watched and waited for you to fail. And sometimes, it meant helping a little girl with a scraped knee, even when every lesson life had taught you screamed to keep walking. Marcus started his walk home through the gathering dusk. Behind him, he heard the SUV's engine start up. He didn't look back. He had his own demons to face now, his mother's worry, her inevitable mixture of pride and fear when he told her what happened. But for the first time in a long while, the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. Not because anything had really changed, but because for one moment, he'd chosen to be who he was instead of who they feared he might be. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for today. Marcus held his breath as Emma's father cast a long shadow over him. The evening sun stretched their silhouettes across the park grass, making the man seem even taller. "You say your name is Marcus Thompson?" The father's voice was controlled, measured. "Yes, sir." Marcus kept his hands visible at his sides. "I live over on Cedar with my mom." Emma tugged at her father's sleeve. "Daddy, my knee doesn't hurt so much now." Marcus fixed it. The father knelt to examine the handkerchief bandage, his expensive suit pants pressing into the grass. "Did he now?" "He told me about when he fell off his bike too," Emma added. Into thorns. A small crowd still lingered at the edges of their bubble, phones lowered but ready. The tension hung thick in the air. "Mr. Thompson," the father said, standing back up. "I'm James Wheeler. I apologize for my initial reaction." Marcus blinked, caught off guard by the apology. "It's okay, sir. I understand." "No," Mr. Wheeler said firmly. "It's not okay." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I was on a business call when my daughter needed me. You stepped in when I should have been paying attention." A woman in the crowd muttered something about making excuses. Mr. Wheeler's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes on Marcus. "I saw what happened," a new voice called out. An elderly man stepped forward from the crowd. The boy did everything right. Approached slowly, kept his distance, asked permission. More than most adults would have done. Other voices joined in. The girl was crying. Someone had to help. "Did you see how gentle he was?" The mood of the crowd shifted, like a wave changing direction. Marcus reached into his backpack and pulled out a crumpled business card. "These are my references, sir, for my yard work." Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Garcia can tell you about me. Mr. Wheeler took the card, studying it. You do yard work? Yes, sir. Mowing, weeding, trimming. Been doing it for 2 years now. Daddy, Emma interrupted, my knees bleeding through the handkerchief. Marcus automatically reached for his backpack again. I have some tissues. That's all right, Mr. Wheeler said, but his tone had softened. We should get her home and properly cleaned up. He turned to Emma. Can you walk to the car, sweetheart? Emma took a wobbly step and winced. Without thinking, Marcus stepped forward to steady her. The crowd held its breath, but Mr. Wheeler didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded at Marcus. Would you help us to the car? It's the black SUV by the playground. Marcus's heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady. Yes, sir. Together, they walked slowly toward the parking lot, Emma between them, Marcus on one side, Mr. Wheeler on the other. The remaining onlookers parted to let them through. Marcus, Emma asked as they walked, will you be at the park tomorrow? Emma, her father warned. I usually come after school, Marcus said carefully. To do homework sometimes. They reached the SUV. Mr. Wheeler opened the back door, and Marcus helped Emma climb in, careful of her injured knee. Thank you again, Mr. Wheeler said, reaching into his wallet. Let me compensate you for the handkerchief and your time. No, sir, Marcus said quickly. Please. I just wanted to help. Something changed in Mr. Wheeler's expression. Surprise, respect, understanding. He slowly put his wallet away. Very well. He pulled out his phone instead. But I'd like your address. For the handkerchief. We'll wash it and return it. Marcus hesitated, then gave him the information. He watched as Mr. Wheeler typed it into his phone. Cedar Street, Mr. Wheeler murmured. That's near the community garden, isn't it? Yes, sir. I help maintain it. Actually, by yourself? Mostly. Mrs. Johnson helps sometimes. Mr. Wheeler nodded slowly, as if making a decision. Well, Marcus Thompson, thank you for helping my daughter today. You showed great character. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. You're welcome, Mr. Wheeler. Marcus stepped back from the car. Take care, Emma. Remember, no more stunts. Emma grinned through the window. Promise. Marcus watched as they drove away, the black SUV gleaming in the evening light. The remaining crowd dispersed, their phones finally put away. He walked to his bench and sat down heavily, his legs suddenly shaky. The entire interaction played through his mind like a movie, every word, every gesture, every moment where things could have gone wrong but somehow didn't. His phone buzzed, his mom again. He needed to get home. Standing up, Marcus shouldered his backpack. The park had returned to normal, kids playing, dogs barking, parents chatting. But something had changed. He could feel it in the way people looked at him now, or rather, the way some of them finally saw him. As he walked home in the gathering dusk, Marcus replayed Mr. Wheeler's words. You showed great character. Not exactly acceptance. Not quite understanding. But maybe, just maybe, it was a start. Marcus's feet felt heavy as he climbed the stairs to his apartment. The events in the park kept replaying in his mind. Emma's tears, the crowd's whispers, Mr. Wheeler's face. His mom was waiting at the door before he could even reach for his keys. Marcus Thompson, where have you been? I've been calling Anne. She stopped, studying his face. What happened? He stepped inside, dropping his backpack by the door. The apartment smelled like spaghetti sauce, his mom's day-off specialty. I had to help someone, he said, sinking into a kitchen chair. At the park, his mom closed the door and crossed her arms. What kind of help? Marcus told her everything. The fall, the bandage, the crowd, Mr. Wheeler. His mom's expression shifted from worry to fear to pride and back again. You gave away your handkerchief, she asked when he finished. Yes. It was clean. She sat down across from him, her cafeteria uniform still on from her shift. Baby, you know how I feel about you getting involved with strangers. I know, Mom, but she was just a little girl. She was crying and bleeding and nobody was helping. His mom reached across the table and took his hand. You did the right thing. She squeezed his fingers. This world doesn't always reward right things from boys who look like you. Mr. Wheeler seemed okay. At the end, his mom repeated softly. She stood up and went to the stove, stirring the sauce. You hungry? Starving. They ate dinner in comfortable silence. Marcus twirled spaghetti around his fork, thinking about Emma's smile when he'd fixed her bike. "Here's my address," Marcus said suddenly. Mr. Wheeler said he wanted to return the handkerchief. His mom's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "The handkerchief you've had since 6th grade and never once used." "Yeah." She shook her head, smiling slightly. "Well, ain't that something?" After dinner, Marcus tried to focus on his homework, but the math problems blurred together. He kept thinking about Mr. Wheeler typing his address into that expensive phone. His mom came into his room around 9, already in her pajamas. "You've been staring at the same page for 20 minutes. Just tired, I guess." She sat on his bed. "Tell me again what Mr. Wheeler said." "Exactly." Marcus repeated the conversation, every word, every look, every shift in tone. His mom listened intently, nodding at certain parts. "You showed great character," she quoted. Those were his exact words. "Yes." She smiled, but her eyes were wet. "You know why that matters? Because he saw me? Not just what people assume." She stood and kissed his forehead. "Get some sleep, baby. Tomorrow's another day." Marcus changed into his pajamas and lay in bed, listening to the city sounds outside his window. A siren wailed in the distance. Someone's car alarm went off briefly. The usual symphony of their neighborhood. He was almost asleep when he heard it. The distinctive purr of an expensive engine, out of place on their street. His eyes snapped open. Marcus got up and went to his window. In the street light's glow, he saw a black SUV crawling past their building. His heart jumped into his throat. "Mom," he called out. "Mom, come here." She appeared in his doorway. "What is it?" "Look." He pointed out the window. They watched together as the SUV reached the end of their block and turned around, coming back slowly. The headlights swept across their building. "Should we?" Marcus started. "We should wait," his mom said firmly. "See what happens." The SUV parked across the street. The engine stayed running, headlights illuminating the cracked sidewalk. Marcus held his breath. His mom's hand found his shoulder, squeezing gently. A minute passed. 2. The SUV didn't move. Then the passenger door opened. Marcus pressed his face against the window screen, trying to see better in the dim light. A figure stepped out, tall, wearing what looked like a suit. "Is that him?" his mom whispered. Before Marcus could answer, a second, smaller figure emerged from the back seat. Even in the darkness, the pink jacket was unmistakable. "That's Emma," Marcus breathed. "And Mr. Wheeler." They stood by the SUV for a moment, seeming to talk. Mr. Wheeler held something in his hands, a package of some kind. "Should we go down?" Marcus asked. His mom was already pulling on her robe. "Yes, but I'm coming with you." They hurried down the 3 flights of stairs, Marcus's heart pounding with each step. What if he was wrong? What if it wasn't them? What if it was them but something was wrong? At the building's entrance, his mom stopped him. "Wait." She straightened his t-shirt, smoothed his hair. "Remember, my worth isn't determined by their fear," Marcus finished. "I know, Mom." She nodded once, then pushed open the door. The warm night air hit them as they stepped outside. Across the street, Mr. Wheeler and Emma turned toward the sound of the door. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Emma's voice broke the silence. "Marcus, look what we brought you." And just like that, the tension cracked like an egg, spilling possibility into the night air. Marcus felt his mom's hand on his back, gentle but firm. Together, they stepped forward to meet whatever came next. The black SUV's headlights cast long shadows on the cracked sidewalk as Marcus and his mom crossed the street. Emma bounced on her toes despite her bandaged knee, while Mr. Wheeler stood straight and tall in his suit, still holding the package. "Good evening," Mr. Wheeler said formally. "I apologize for the late hour." Marcus's mom stepped slightly in front of him. "I'm Patricia Thompson, Marcus's mother, James Wheeler." He gestured to Emma. "And my daughter, who insisted we come tonight rather than waiting for a more appropriate time. I wanted to show Marcus my new bandage." Emma lifted her dress slightly to reveal a proper adhesive bandage covered in cartoon characters. "See? Much better than the handkerchief." Marcus couldn't help smiling. "That's definitely an upgrade." Mr. Wheeler cleared his throat. "Ms. Thompson, I wanted to thank your son personally for helping Emma today. His actions were—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "They showed remarkable character, Patricia's posture relaxed slightly, but her voice remained cautious. That's how I raised him. Indeed. Mr. Wheeler held out the package. We brought this for Marcus. It was a large box wrapped in brown paper. Marcus looked at his mom, who nodded slightly. He took the package. It was heavier than he expected. Open it, Emma urged, practically vibrating with excitement. Marcus carefully unwrapped the paper. Inside was a professional gardening set, pruning shears, trowel, garden fork, and other tools he recognized but had never been able to afford. Emma mentioned you work in the community garden, Mr. Wheeler explained. And do yard work for neighbors. Yes, sir. Marcus ran his fingers over the tools. They were high quality, the kind he'd seen in store windows but never dared dream of owning. Daddy says you can do our garden too. Emma blurted out. We have lots of plants that need help. Mr. Wheeler shot his daughter a look. Emma, we discussed waiting to ask. It's okay, Emma said confidently. Marcus is good at fixing things. Like my bike and my knee. Patricia stepped forward. Mr. Wheeler, while we appreciate the gesture, this isn't charity, Ms. Thompson, he interrupted smoothly. It's a business proposition. I've seen your son's work ethic firsthand. Our regular landscaper recently retired, and we've been looking for someone reliable. Marcus's heart skipped. You want to hire me? If you're interested, the hours would work around your school schedule, of course. Patricia crossed her arms, and the pay. The same rate we paid our previous landscaper. $25 an hour, twice a week. Marcus's eyes widened. That was more than triple what he usually made. I also took the liberty of speaking with some neighbors, Mr. Wheeler continued. Several expressed interest in your services. Once I vouched for your work. Emma tugged at Marcus's sleeve. Will you do it? Please? Our roses are all droopy. Marcus looked at his mom. Her face was unreadable. May I see your contract? She asked Mr. Wheeler. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out an envelope. Standard landscaping agreement. My business card is attached, along with references you can contact. Patricia took the envelope, studying it in the SUV's headlights. We'll need time to review this. Of course. Mr. Wheeler checked his watch. Emma, we should head home. It's past your bedtime. But I want to see the garden. Another time, sweetheart. He turned to Marcus and Patricia. Take your time reviewing the contract. Call my office when you've made a decision. Emma gave an exaggerated sigh. Fine. Bye, Marcus. Thanks for helping me today. You're welcome, Emma. Take care of that knee. They watched as Mr. Wheeler helped Emma back into the SUV. Before getting in himself, he turned back. Miss Thompson, you've raised a fine young man. Patricia's hand found Marcus's shoulder. I know. The SUV pulled away smoothly, its taillights disappearing around the corner. Marcus stood holding his new tools, still trying to process everything that had happened. Mom, he finally said. Let's go inside, baby. We've got some reading to do. They climbed the stairs in silence, the contract in Patricia's hand, the tools cradled in Marcus's arms. Each step felt like walking through a dream. Back in their apartment, Marcus carefully arranged the tools on the kitchen table while his mom read the contract under the fluorescent light. Well, he asked after several minutes. She looked up, her eyes shining. It's legitimate. Full insurance coverage, workers' compensation, everything spelled out clearly. She smiled. Mr. Wheeler might have expensive shoes, but he doesn't play games with paperwork. Marcus picked up one of the pruning shears, testing its weight. So, can I do it? His mom set down the contract. You know this doesn't fix everything, right? One man being decent doesn't change the whole world. I know, Mom. And you'll have to work twice as hard to prove yourself. I know that too. She came around the table and hugged him tight. Then yes, you can do it. Marcus buried his face in his mom's shoulder, breathed in her familiar scent of hospital soap and spaghetti sauce. Thank you. Just promise me one thing. What? She pulled back, holding his face in her hands. Promise you'll never stop being the kind of person who helps crying little girls, no matter what the world throws at you. Marcus thought of Emma's smile, of Mr. Wheeler's words about character, of the crowd that had shifted from suspicion to support. I promise, Mom. They stayed up late, reading and rereading the contract, examining each tool, making plans for the future. Outside, the city continued its nighttime symphony. But for once, the sirens and car alarms seemed distant, unimportant. Something had changed today. Not everything. Not even most things. But something. And sometimes, that's enough to build a future on. Marcus woke early the next morning, his new gardening tools still laid out on the kitchen table where he'd left them. He touched each one again, making sure yesterday hadn't been a dream. His mom was already up, making coffee. The garden tools didn't disappear overnight, she teased. Just checking. He picked up the pruning shears. These alone probably cost more than all my old tools combined. Patricia handed him a piece of toast. Eat. You've got school, and I need to call those references before my shift. Marcus had just finished getting dressed when someone knocked on their door. His mom answered it, revealing their neighbor, Mrs. Johnson. Patricia, have you seen this? She held up a piece of paper. It was in my mailbox this morning. Marcus peered over his mom's shoulder. It was a letter, printed on expensive-looking paper with a company letterhead. Dear Mrs. Johnson, his mom read aloud. I'm writing to recommend the landscaping services of Marcus Thompson, who recently demonstrated exceptional character and professionalism in helping my daughter. Marcus's throat tightened as his mom continued reading. The letter detailed his help with Emma, his careful handling of a sensitive situation, and his evident knowledge of garden work. He's already proven himself an asset to your community garden, Patricia read, her voice growing thick. I believe he would be an excellent choice for any landscaping needs you may have. Sincerely, James Wheeler, CEO, Wheeler Development Group. Mrs. Johnson beamed. There are copies all over the neighborhood. And look, she pulled out her phone. The community Facebook group is buzzing. People are sharing stories about Marcus's work in the garden, how he always helps carry groceries, how polite he is. Marcus sat down hard in a kitchen chair. Really? Really? Baby? His mom wiped her eyes. Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold. At school, Marcus noticed something different. The kids who usually ignored him were looking at him curiously. During lunch, someone actually sat with him. Hey, said Michael from his math class. Is it true you helped some CEO's daughter yesterday? Marcus poked at his cafeteria pizza. I just helped a kid who fell off a bike. My mom saw it on Facebook. Said you were really cool about it. By the end of lunch, 3 more kids had joined their table. After school, Marcus headed straight to the community garden. He had his new tools in his backpack, wrapped carefully in old towels. To his surprise, Emma was there with her father. Her pink bicycle leaned against the fence, sporting a new helmet hanging from the handlebars. Marcus, she waved excitedly. Look what Daddy bought me. Mr. Wheeler stood nearby in casual clothes, the first time Marcus had seen him without a suit. Emma insisted on coming to see your garden. Marcus set down his backpack. It's not really mine. It belongs to the neighborhood. But you take care of it, Emma said, examining a tomato plant. Like you took care of me. Mr. Wheeler cleared his throat. Have you had a chance to review the contract? Yes, sir. My mom's calling your references today. Good. He looked around the garden. Emma, stay where I can see you. She was already crouching by a flower bed, watching a butterfly. Her knee, Marcus noticed, seemed much better. Marcus pulled out his new tools, feeling their weight in his hands. Mr. Wheeler watched as he began working on a stubborn weed. Those are professional grade, he said. Should last years with proper care. Yes, sir. Thank you again. They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by Emma's occasional exclamations about bugs or flowers she discovered. After a while, Mr. Wheeler spoke again. My wife wanted to meet you. To thank you herself. Marcus looked up, surprised. Perhaps, if you accept the job, you could join us for dinner one evening. Your mother too, of course. Before Marcus could respond, Emma called out, Can we have spaghetti? Marcus likes spaghetti. Mr. Wheeler raised an eyebrow. She asked what my favorite food was. Marcus explained, feeling his face warm. While I was fixing her bike. Spaghetti it is, then. Mr. Wheeler checked his phone. Emma, time to go. Mom's waiting. Emma pouted but came running. Can we come back tomorrow? Marcus has school tomorrow. After school. Mr. Wheeler looked at Marcus. That's up to him. Marcus thought about his homework, his chores, his other commitments. But he also thought about Emma's smile, about second chances, about bridges being built. After school would be fine, he said. I usually work here until dinner time. Emma beamed. I'll bring my homework too. We can study together. As they left, Marcus watched Emma chattering to her father, her pink bicycle rolling beside them. Other people were in the park now, watching the scene with curious expressions. Mrs. Johnson appeared at the garden fence. Was that James Wheeler? In jeans? Marcus nodded, returning to his weeding. Well, if that doesn't beat all. She shook her head, smiling. You know, 5 people asked me about hiring you today. 5. Marcus sat back on his heels, looking at his new tools glinting in the afternoon sun. Really? Really? Though you might want to raise your rates now that you're in demand. They both laughed, and Marcus felt something settle in his chest, a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. Later that evening, his mom called him into the kitchen. She had papers spread across the table. I talked to Mr. Wheeler's references, she said, and looked up his company. Everything checks out. She held up a pen. Ready to sign your first real contract. Marcus took the pen, its weight suddenly significant in his hand. Mom, do you think things might actually be changing? She pulled him close, kissing the top of his head. Baby, things change one heart at a time. Sometimes it takes a scraped knee and a brave boy to start the process. Marcus signed his name carefully, each letter a promise to himself and to others who might follow. Outside, the sun was setting over their neighborhood. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove himself. But for now, he had this moment, his mother's pride, a signed contract, and the memory of a little girl's smile transcending all the barriers others had built. Sometimes, that's what victory looks like. Marcus stood in Mr. Wheeler's immaculate backyard, surveying the overgrown rose bushes. The morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn, highlighting the areas that needed his attention. They're a bit wild, Mr. Wheeler admitted, standing beside him in another casual weekend outfit. Our previous gardener let them go before retiring. Marcus touched a drooping stem. They need pruning and better support. The stems are too heavy for their stakes. Can you fix them? Yes, sir. Marcus opened his tool bag, the same high-quality tools that had started everything 2 weeks ago. But it'll take time to do it right. Take all the time you need. Mr. Wheeler checked his watch. Emma should be up soon. She insisted on having breakfast outside to supervise your work. As if on cue, the back door opened. Emma bounded out in pajamas and rubber boots, her mother following with a tray of breakfast. Marcus, Emma called, are you going to save the roses? Going to try. He pulled out his pruning shears. Want to learn how? Mrs. Wheeler set the tray on the patio table. She was younger than Marcus had expected, wearing yoga clothes and a warm smile. Breakfast first, Emma. Let Marcus work. But Marcus found himself joining them at the table, explaining his plans for the roses while Emma drowned her pancakes in syrup. Mrs. Wheeler asked thoughtful questions about gardening, while Mr. Wheeler typed notes into his phone. Other neighbors have been asking about you, Mrs. Wheeler mentioned. The Andersons next door were particularly impressed with how their azaleas look. Marcus nodded. In the past 2 weeks, he'd taken on 4 new clients in the neighborhood, each paying the same rate as Mr. Wheeler. His mom had helped him open his first bank account to handle the payments. The community garden's looking better than ever too, Emma added around a mouthful of pancakes. Emma, don't talk with your mouth full, her mother scolded gently. After breakfast, Marcus started work on the roses. Emma stayed to watch, asking questions about every cut and tie. Why that branch? It's crossing over others, blocking sunlight, Marcus explained, demonstrating with his shears. See how it makes everything crowded? Emma nodded seriously. Like when too many kids try to use the slide at once. Exactly like that. Mrs. Wheeler brought them lemonade mid-morning. Emma, don't you have homework to do? But Mom, I'm learning about gardening. That's science. Marcus hid his smile behind his glass of lemonade. Around noon, his phone buzzed. A text from his mom. How's it going? He typed back quickly. Good. Having lunch with them soon. Another buzz. Proud of you, baby. The roses took most of the day. Marcus worked carefully, showing Emma how to tie the stems properly to their new supports. Mr. Wheeler came and went, taking business calls but always returning to check on their progress. Marcus, Emma asked during a water break. Remember when I fell off my bike? Hard to forget. Were you scared? When you came to help me? Marcus set down his water bottle. Yeah, I was. But you helped anyway. Sometimes being brave means doing the right thing even when you're scared. Emma considered this. Like when I got back on my bike. Exactly like that. By late afternoon, the rose garden had transformed. The bushes stood straight and proud, their branches properly supported, deadwood cleared away. They'll bloom better now, Marcus explained to the Wheelers. More sun, better air circulation. It's remarkable, Mrs. Wheeler said. The whole garden looks different. Mr. Wheeler nodded in agreement. You have a real talent, Marcus. Thank you, sir. Marcus packed his tools carefully. I should head home. My mom's making dinner. Oh! Emma jumped up. Don't forget about tomorrow. Marcus smiled. Their study sessions in the community garden had become a regular thing. Emma doing homework while Marcus tended the plants. I won't forget. Mrs. Wheeler touched his arm. Thank you, Marcus. Not just for the roses. He knew what she meant. Things had changed in the neighborhood since that day in the park. People who used to cross the street now waved hello. Kids from school asked to help in the garden. Even the security guard at the shopping plaza had started greeting him by name. Small changes, but real ones. At home, his mom was making their usual Sunday dinner. The apartment smelled like roasted chicken and fresh bread. How are the Wheelers? She asked as he washed up. Good. The roses look better now. She nodded at his bank statement on the table. 3 more people called today about hiring you. Really? Really? She wiped her hands on a dish towel. We might need to get you some business cards made. After dinner, Marcus stood at his window, looking out at the street below. The same street where the black SUV had appeared that night, changing everything. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. The roses look happy now. Like they are smiling. Marcus smiled too. Tomorrow he'd go back to school, do his homework in the garden, tend to his growing list of clients. Normal things, everyday things. But things that felt different now, weighted with new meaning and possibility. His mom appeared in his doorway. You okay, baby? Yeah. He turned from the window. Just thinking about how things change. They do. She came to stand beside him. One garden at a time. One person at a time. Marcus thought about Emma's question earlier. Were you scared? He had been. Of course he had been. But he'd helped anyway. And maybe that's what change really was, not some grand gesture or dramatic moment, but simple choices made in everyday moments. Helping someone up when they fall. Tending a garden others had abandoned. Believing in possibility even when fear whispered otherwise. Outside, the city settled into its nighttime rhythm. But inside, Marcus felt the quiet hum of growth, like plants reaching towards sunlight, like trust being built hour by hour, like roses learning to stand tall again. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove himself. But tonight, he had this, a garden coming back to life under his care. A little girl's friendship freely given. A neighborhood's walls slowly crumbling. A mother's unwavering faith. And his own growing certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Not just surviving in the world they'd given him, but helping to build a better one small choice at a time. Marcus turned away from the window and hugged his mom tight. Tomorrow was waiting. And he was ready.